All right. Well, hey everybody, thank you for coming out today. This is going to be a pretty good interview, so I'm pretty excited about it. Thank you again for coming.
No, thank you very much.
I guess, a proper introduction to what's going on here and who we've got. So this is going to be an addition to the podcast series that the Ideas Center for the Arts is going to be hosting throughout the foreseeable future. My name is Justin Harris, and this man, this man right here, publisher, educator, editor, and
Poet.
oh, and poet. I mean, Dr. Madhubuti. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I just want to thank Cynthia Promise and the Ideas Center for the Arts for allowing us to come here today to be with you all. It's means a great deal to me, especially the 55th anniversary of the Third World Press.
Absolutely.
But to come here and see this center really brought kind of tears to my eyes, but at the same time a bright smile. Black people talk about black people,
Yeah.
but very few people actually love black people. Okay? And when you find a place like this in our community, close to our community, and I walk in, I'm looking at the walls, I'm looking at, number one, it's clean.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Cynthia, this is beautiful.
She took me around and showed me the areas in which the work is actually being done. And walked out in the backyard, and you got two people actually working on a mural back there in the backyard. And so I've been involved in Black struggle all my adult life. My wife and I, we've been married over 50 years.
Congratulations.
And my wife is brilliant. She was Dr. Carol D. Lee, I call her Mama Sufficient. But to see what Sister Cynthia is doing here, and to go right down 2 doors or 3 doors down, you got another sister open up a coffee shop and another gallery. So it's blooming. And my dear friend of over 20-some odd years, Dr. Diane T. Turner, basically brought us in to celebrate the 55th anniversary celebration at the Bloxham Institute down at Temple. And she was able to talk to Sister Cynthia and say, can we come in and spend a little bit of time with you all? So it's my pleasure, and I'm really happy to be here.
Okay. Happy to have you. I can admit, Maurice, he's, when he was telling me that, we got a special guest coming in and everything like that, he's usually very outright about, who the people are and what's going on. So when he was keeping it from me for a little bit, I was like, what's going on? But I was very delighted to see your bio when he sent it over and just get a full sort of short-term introduction and getting the long-term introduction now. So, all right. So I guess we can just hop right into the question.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would like to think, or at least that your passion as a poet came before Third World Press.
Everything, right.
Yeah. So could you just tell me a little bit about what inspires you to become a poet, or like what or who, per se?
Well, I grew up in extreme poverty in the Lower East Side of Detroit, Michigan. It's called Black Bottom. And my father was never there. He never lived with us. He was actually in Chicago. And my father was a gangster. He worked the streets. He had the numbers. At that time, he had numbers. Worked in number field. And my mother was a very beautiful black woman. When I'm saying yellow black, it's high yellow, straight hair, and all this stuff. But not very well educated. And the only way she could take care of my sister and myself was to go into the sex trade. And so she worked at one of the high-level lounges and bars in Detroit called Sonny Wilson's. And she ended up having to sell herself to take care of the two of us. And ended up, because it brings you into the underside of our lives, drugs and alcohol. And when you work in the sex trade, you only got 10 years. It's like an athlete at one level, And during her 9th or 10th year, she was, losing her beauty, taking tricks on the side, and she ended up going on a date one weekend. Now this is, understand Detroit, at that time, this is in the 50s. I'm 80 years old. And so you couldn't use the hotels.
You said you're 80?
I'm 80, right? Not gonna have 81.
I'm sorry, what?
So they couldn't use the regular hotels, they had these houses that they used to have sex. And so she had sold herself for a night, and it turned into a weekend. And I would go out looking for her. I'm, 14, 15 years old. I used to carry a lead pipe in my belt because I was 6'1", looked like a walking skeleton. Wasn't nobody afraid of me. But so I'm looking for my mama, and I found her. She had been beaten to death. And so, but before she left me and my sister, she demanded that I go to the Detroit Library and check out Black Boy of Richard Wright. I was just going on 14. And I refused to go. I didn't want to go. I hated myself. I just hated my circumstances. I hated my color. I hated everything. And she demanded that I go check this book out. I went to the Detroit Public Library because I didn't want to go to the library and ask a white librarian for a book with black in the title by an author, Richard Wright, who was supposedly criticizing white America because I hated myself. But I went, but I didn't go to the library, and I went to the stacks. I found the book in the stacks, pulled the book out, went to the unpeopled section of the library, and sat down and began to read. And for the first time in my life, I was reading words and sentences and paragraphs that were not anti-black. I mean, for the first time in my life, at 14 years old, I'm reading literature that was not an embarrassment. I read Black Boy with Richard Wright in less than 24 hours. Took it home, gave it to my mother the next day, and kissed her, my mother. I went back to the library and checked out everything Richard Wright had published. And one of the many books of Wright had published that very few people have read is a book titled White Man Listen. And it's a book of essays. Of course, Wright is primarily a novelist, a fiction writer. And so I read Black Boy, which is nonfiction, and then I read White Man Listen. But in the book White Man Listen, there's a very important essay on black literature. And so in reading this, it called Negro literature at that time, this essay by Wright on Negro literature, now I see all these black writers, and this is in the about 58, 59, 1959. And that's stopped me in my tracks because no one ever told me that black people could write, let alone publish books. Okay? And so Wright pulled me into the literature that had been published by that time. And so that's when I found Gwendolyn Brooks, Mario Walker, Alexander, Gene Toomer, and Melvin Tosin, and Robert Hayden, and go on and on. That saved my life because I'm in the streets.
Yeah.
I'm 24/7 in the streets, just trying to stay alive and take it. Because it's just my mother, myself, my sister. My sister had her first child at 14 years old. And by the time my sister was 27, she had 6 children by 5 different men. So that's the kind of community I come from. So in that kind of community, one or two things happen. You end up hating yourself and hating the people around you. And therefore, you participate in the destruction of the community.
Yeah.
Or because I found the literature that brought me into an understanding of who we actually are, where we actually came from, how we got here,
Absolutely.
I ended up loving myself. And so people say, well, okay, you're 80 years old, why are you still doing this? Well, I love black people. All right? It's as simple as that. I love black people. And as a result of that, reading this literature early, I started writing because first I was going to be a musician. I was a halfway decent trumpet player.
Oh.
All right? I had, went to one of the top high schools in Detroit. It was called Cass Tech. And had a scholarship to Wayne State University in music. Okay? But when my mother was, killed, I had to end up leaving Detroit and come to Chicago to live with a stranger. And that stranger was my father. That lasted less than 6 months because once he tried to put his hands on me, I'm not going to, I don't know you.
Yeah.
All right? And you're not going to put your hands on me. And so I backed him up. And as I backed him up, I went to where I was sleeping at and got my clothes and left. And I moved to the YMCA. I'm still in high school. Okay? But once you have this knowledge, then there are possibilities. That's the key thing. But once you learn to read and study and see other perspectives,
Yeah.
you say, well, maybe there's something out there for me. All right? And that's the way I've been all my life. And so I started writing poetry. Because see, I was a good trumpet player, but good is not enough to do this. It's not enough. You see, I could read music. I could read. I was second trumpet. I held second chair in a high school in the all-city band. But I could not think music. Okay, I couldn't do what Bootsy did on his life. And so I started writing, okay, and reading poetry extensively, just reading poetry, and became a poet. There's a lot more to it, son, but the point is, at 18, I'm on my own, no money, nothing. I had a Martin flugelhorn, okay, that I bought from the pawn shop, okay, poor man's band. And I joined this magazine selling group going across Illinois, stopping in towns selling subscriptions to magazines. Just 2 cars, 2 adult black people, and the rest teenagers. Okay. And they stopped in this, I think it might have been Springfield, Illinois. And I knocked on this door, and this very elegant black man answered the door. And my lie was, I had my suit on that I wore to my mother's funeral. Okay. And my lie was, I working my way through Howard University. I never been to DC, never been to okay. But that was my lie in terms of trying to sell these subscriptions. And the brother answered the door, he said, come on in, I'm a Howard University Law School graduate, come on in. I knew
Caught up, yeah.
I knew at that point. And so he invited me in and asked me to sit down and say, you hungry? You want something to eat? 6'1", 131, 40 pounds, you know I'm hungry. So his wife made me a sandwich and brought me something to drink. And he said, quite early, I know you're not a student at Howard. And it was quite profound because he was a black man who could have easily jumped into my chest for lying. Right? But he said, there's one thing that no one will ever take away from you, young man. That's an education. I just turned 18. I said, yes, sir. And I said, he said, you need to, if you can't go to Howard, you need to go to, they just started these community colleges. You go to community college. And they're free. I said, yes, sir. He bought a subscription to Jet Magazine and Ebony and Post and Life Magazine. And I said, yes, sir, thank you very much. And so he fed me. He gave me knowledge. He bought the magazine subscriptions, got his money. And I got up to leave and thanked him profusely. And as I'm going toward the door, he said, son, I'm keep walking. See, nobody ever called me son. All right, so I don't know, then he said, young man, with me. And he went into his wallet, and this is 1960. He pulled out a $20 bill. He folded the $20 bill into quarters. He said, put this in your wallet and use it for an emergency. And so that started me on this long track of loving black people. Okay? And you cannot, at any level, turn me against my own people. It will never happen. All right? But this love is deep, and you cannot destroy it. I don't care what black people do to black people. That's what we've been taught. We only do what we've been taught to do. So if these young brothers out here killing each other, that's what they've been taught to do. All right? So I'm not coming out against them. I'm coming out against the system that taught them to kill each other. And that's what we have to understand. But to get to that level of understanding requires study. It requires a high level of seriousness and discipline. And it requires people around you that care for you. So I can go on and on. But anyway, I ended up pounding my horn. Because we got to East St. Louis and I got sick from eating all that bad food. And the people I was traveling with left me. They left. I had the $20. I paid for the room that I was living in. Went into St. Louis. Joined the military. Joined the United States Army. Because it was the poor boy's answer to unemployment. I had no family except my sister. She can't even take care of herself. She's too busy having problems that she could not solve herself. And I was too young to solve them for her. And it was just the two of us. But anyway, ended up in the military, and the rest is another long story.
No, thank you for exactly. Thank you for that. It's very opening. It's very vulnerable. Thank you. But if we were to tie it back to poetry in some way, who are some influential figures? I know that you named some names before. If you could pick maybe a top 3 that you possibly had, in terms of black poets.
Oh yeah, the top 3. That's no problem. Gwendolyn Brooks would be at the top. Gwendolyn Brooks ended up being my cultural mother, and we ended up publishing. We are her exclusive publishers now. We published 14 of her books. We feature on our catalog.
That is amazing.
Dudley Randall would be number 2. Dudley Randall was my first publisher, Broadside Press. We modeled Third World Press after Broadside Press. And Broadside Press is in Detroit, Michigan. And so when Malcolm El-Haj al-Shabazz was assassinated, and he mentored me, not by him being in my life, but he mentored me in terms of my following him so closely.
Yep, and how he lived.
And seeing what he was doing and understanding why he left the nation and so forth, which I'm not going to get into. But the point is, Malcolm was the man for me. And but what happened when Malcolm was assassinated, Dudley Randall, who had founded Broadside Press in 1962, came to Chicago to talk to Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who was also very close to me. She was one of the founders of the DuSable Museum of African American History, which is the first black museum in the country. So I was volunteering there. And so I met Dudley Randall, and he was talking to Margaret, and I had my poem on Malcolm. And of course, he came to acquire her assistance in pulling together this anthology on the life and legacy of Malcolm. And the book is For Malcolm, that's the title of the book. So I asked Dudley Randall would he consider my poem, and he said yes, and he put it in the book. And that was 1965. And so Dudley Randall was one of the major poets to come out of Michigan. In fact, he was a poet laureate of Detroit, Michigan. Right? And he and I became very close. Just like I and Margaret Burroughs became very close. They I put them as key mentors. And so we got Gwendolyn Brooks, got Dudley Randall, then Margaret Walker. I can name all, Millie Baraka. It was Leroy Jones at that time. I remember reading prefix to 20-volume suicide note back in the 60s. And that was before he became, Amiri Baraka, before he became quote-unquote black, because he was still living in the village, messing with people who don't even look like him. But we became very close eventually. And Sonny Sanchez, who's still with us down in Philadelphia. I met Sonny in '68. Her influence came late, okay? But in terms of early influences, most certainly Robert Hayden. Most people, our people do not know Robert Hayden's work. But Robert Hayden, if you're talking about the key craft and conscious poets to come out of the 50s, in terms of the top of the line, you're talking about Robert Hayden and Gwendolyn Brooks. Then you can put Margaret Walker at that same level. I mean, Melvin B. Tosin, and so forth. And this is why the study of poetry is so critical. And those writers, those four, and of course Dudley Randall, 5, were craftspeople who were conscious. See, they were taught how to write from the old traditions of European literature, but began to break the bonds of that literature and create their own literature. See? So those people had a great influence on me. But my consciousness came from Richard Wright, who was not a poet. He wrote poetry, but he was not primarily a poet. And you know, the Carter G. Woodson, W.B. Du Bois. People don't realize that Du Bois was a poet also. He published one book of poetry. I have one book of poetry. And not only Du Bois, in fact, Du Bois and the, I always can't remember his name, the baritone singer, Paul Robeson. So Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois, I adopted them as my grandfathers. So if you look at the book Yellow Black, which is first 21 years of my life, I got a picture of Du Bois and Robeson, and under that I adopted these brothers as my grandfathers. And so my life exists as a result of the literature, the visual art, and the music. That's all I spend my money on. And the sisters I was dealing with at the time said, "You don't have no money to spend on me because you're buying all these books." That's not true. Close to it. And but that's it. Those are 4 or 5 poets.
Definitely, thank you for sharing them. I'm gonna definitely have to look into a couple on myself. Okay, so since we went through the poetry and everything, you know, the original origins of how you got into it, let's go over to Third World Press.
Sure.
Let's go over there. So the journey of becoming a publisher for you, as well as, you know, founding Third World Press and just the origin story and, you know, the overall originality of it. I want you to just talk to me about it. If you
Well, because of my early life, I never was put in a position where I depended upon white people. I never got to the point where writing poetry and sending them out to white journals just to be rejected.
Yeah.
And meeting Dudley Randall was pivotal because he himself had started the first independent black book publishing company in Detroit, Michigan, Broadside Press. But also I was in the city of John Johnson, who had founded Ebony, Jet, Negro Digest, which became Black World Magazine.
Yeah.
Okay, and had built a headquarters downtown Chicago. And so I knew Mr. Johnson. And our paths crossed several times. I'll come back to that. But I was volunteering at the DuSable Museum of African American History, which was located in Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs' home on the first floor.
Are you serious?
Yes, first floor and the basement. And they lived on the second floor. Third.
Oh, that's crazy.
So I was in the military station at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, really going crazy because I'm reading all this black material and there's nobody to talk to. And you basically end up, I was almost given a dishonorable discharge because I'm fighting all the time with these crazy young white boys who didn't even know their own names. And a young lieutenant called a sergeant at Fort Sheridan because I was stationed at this missile base in Arlington Heights, Illinois. I was the only black person there. And I couldn't get along with anybody. They couldn't get along with me. Problem. And so he called the sergeant and said, can you take this young private or PFC, I don't know what my rank was at that time. And he said, yeah, I'll take it. And he saved my life in terms of the military because I became a worker with him. He was a cook for one of the generals on the base. In fact, the general in which he was a cook for came from the Sears family, Sears and Roebuck family.
Seriously.
They had nothing but money. And so I was able to stay in that general's home in the basement because I couldn't go back to the barracks because I just couldn't get along with anybody. Yeah. And but it allowed me to read. I'm just reading. I'm studying all the time. Bought my first car, secondhand car and stuff like that, getting back here. So I'm reading this literature and there's nobody to talk to. And so I saw in the newspaper, the Chicago Defender at that time was the only black, well, there was only 2 black newspapers in the country that were dailies. The Atlanta Daily News, and the Chicago Defender. You know? And I had a relationship with, I ended up with a relationship with both papers. But I saw in the Defender this ad for the Ebony Museum of Negro History. And so I went in one Saturday morning. White man answered the door. I said, I'm in the wrong place. But this white man was a man by the name of Eugene Feldman, who was a Jewish white man who had been run out of Alabama, I believe it was, for writing about black people. And so he came to work with Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs and others. So I asked him, I said, is Margaret Burroughs available for me to just talk to for a few minutes? He said, yeah, come on in. And took me back to the kitchen. And she's working on a linoleum cut. She's a world-class artist, visual artist, okay? And I'm standing there looking at her, and she said, what do you want, boy? I said, I need to talk to somebody. And the reason I'm staring at her is because she's the first black woman I ever saw in the natural. It's 1962. Okay. And said, go upstairs and talk to my husband. So I go upstairs, and they got a world-class library. And he's sitting down at a table writing. I saw some water next to him and so forth. I come in, he said, come on in, young man, what can I do for you? He said, you want something to drink? I said, yeah, I'll take some water. He said, no, this is vodka. Now I'm one of the few black men you and me who actually been through the military and never drink, never smoked. Okay. And I'm plant-based. I'm a vegan. I've been 45 years. I've been a vegan. And so he said, well, I'll get you some water. He got me some water. We talked. But the key thing about Charlie Burroughs was that he was partially raised in the USSR.
Seriously?
Oh yeah, he spoke Russian fluently. Okay. And so he and Margaret were married and so forth. And so he began to widen my whole universe in terms of introducing me to Russian literature. You know, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. But the most important poet he introduced me to was Alexander Pushkin, who was, African-Russian poet. Okay. In fact, Alexander Pushkin is their major poet at the USSR, but in Russia. Okay. So that's how it all started. But now, the key point of the question is that I'm viewing and working and volunteering at that time, the Ebony Museum. They had to change the name to the DuSable Museum because Johnny Johnson, who had founded Ebony, was going to sue him for using the name Ebony on the museum.
Oh, wow.
So they changed the name, which was the best, to the DuSable Museum. DuSable, Jean-Pierre Pointe DuSable founded Chicago. He was a Haitian trader. And so when Dudley Randall came in to get the help of Margaret Burroughs, the second time after they finished the book, I gave him my manuscript of my second book. I published my first book, Think Black, actually in 1966 and into 67. And then I gave Dudley Randall my second book, Black Pride. Now it's interesting that the titles of my first two books, Think Black, and Yellow Black, Think Black, Think Black, Think Black. And then the second book, Black Pride. Okay? He took Black Pride back, and within a week he called me and said, we're going to publish a book. And said, would you mind if I wrote an introduction? Now this is big.
Yeah.
Okay? My second book, and one of the major poets in our tradition saying, I want to write an introduction. And we'll publish it. So I received about $400 from two or three poetry readings during this period, 1966, 67. And I said, I'm going to start a publishing company, Third World Press. And I write about it in the catalog. And so I did. I started Third World Press. And had two other poets help me out, Kelvin Rogers and Jahari Amini. Okay. And so that's what happened. But during this period, it's nothing but activities. I'm working with CORE, I'm working with SNCC, I'm working with SCLC. I'm hitting the streets all the time, going to bars and taverns, reading with jazz groups, you know. And I was reading one night at the New Sutherland Lounge in Chicago, and I was reading a poem from the second book. And the last three lines of the poem, Diane, close your ears up. The last three lines of the poem read, Jesus saved, Jesus saved, Jesus saves, that's in those green stamps. Okay? And what happened, a young writer was in the bar. He cracked up and literally fell off the seat laughing, okay? His name was David Lorenz. And David Lorenz was a writer for Ebony and Negro Digest, all right? And so we became very close.
Small world, yeah.
And I'm skipping a whole lot. But once I got the position, once I started teaching at Columbia College in Chicago, and I left Columbia College in Chicago, I got a position at Cornell University. I was the first black poet in resident at an Ivy League university at Cornell. That was 1968. And so David Lorenz went to Mr. Johnson and said, this is the first black poet in the history of the Ivy Leagues who's in residence at a major Ivy League university. Can we do a story on it? He sold it to John H. Johnson, and he had the first black Pulitzer Prize winner in photography, Moni Distinct, came to Cornell and followed me around. And then that story hit in 1969 when my third book hit, which was Don't Cry Scream. And Don't Cry Scream sold that year over 75,000 copies from Broadside Press.
I gotta give you some.
You know, but there's much more than that, because see what happened once Don't Cry Scream hit.
Yeah.
White persons came after me. But by that time I had met Gwendolyn Brooks. And I met Gwendolyn Brooks. She was at a church on the south side of Chicago teaching the Blackstone Rangers poetry writing. And so I and some other poets walked in Saturday morning to see Miss Brooks and introduce ourselves to her. And I'm listening to everything she said. She's teaching these young teenagers. And when she finished up, you know, everybody else that left, I stayed around for a minute. And I said, Miss Brooks, I just wanted to give you something. And I had my first book, Think Black. And I gave it to her. And for about 5 to 10 seconds, she looked at the title, Think Black. And she put it to her heart. And she said, young man, I'm going to read this tonight. That started a 33-year familyhood. Because once because she's working with the great Oscar Brown Jr. See, Oscar Brown Jr. is actually the first rapper, modern rapper. okay? I mean, Charles Mingus, he tried it around, so, but I'm saying Oscar Brown had it, okay? And so he was putting together, working in the black community. Greg Willard Brooks working with him now, putting on this kind of off-Broadway show with black young people from the Blackstone Rangers and other gangs, youth groups, okay? And so Oscar, he would read my stuff and say, oh, look, I know people call you crazy, but you good. You good. All right. And so that's how that happened. So what happened, we started the publishing company out of my basement apartment with $400 in a mimeograph machine. And Gwendolyn Brooks moved that workshop to her home. And so she had the workshop in her home, okay? And when I went to sign the contract, Dudley Randall called me to come sign a contract for the second book. I said, I'll come, and I did. I'm glad I went because Broadside Press was in his home, okay? So now I've seen these two institutions in the founder's home.
Yeah.
So for me to come back in my basement apartment about the size of the stage that I share with other unwanted animals, is what I found at Critical Press. And so Gwendolyn Brooks and I became very close because she moved the workshop to her home, and we'd meet every week in her home. And her home was about half the size of this place. Wooden frame home in the south side of Chicago. And there's so much fun. But the key point is that once I saw the museum and Broadside Press, I said, I got this. I got this. And I got into teaching at the university level. I came out of the military and went to university on a GI Bill of Rights. And once I started teaching at Columbia College with an undergraduate degree, I didn't have a graduate degree at that time. And but the president of the college said, okay, Gwendolyn Brooks is teaching here now. She's the first black to win the Pulitzer Prize. And what do you have? So she's going to New York to teach at one of the major universities in New York. And she wanted me to take her class. And so since I was not credentialed at the level that I needed to be, I had to have an interview with the president of the college. It lasted 3 hours and I got the job. And so I started teaching at Columbia College in my early 20s. And what happened, I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to remember why Cornell came after me. I have to come back to that. But, this is what happened. The students at Cornell, they were reading Don L. Lee. Okay, I was the hottest poet at that time. My first 4 books, Don't Cry, Scream, Think Black, Black Pride, Don't Cry, Scream, and We Walked Away the New World, all 4 books sold over 140,000 copies. And so the students at Cornell University who began to form the whole movement toward Africana studies needed someone to come in and work with them. And they wanted me. And so, because they, read my poetry and stuff like that. And so I went in and had to talk with them and read poetry. So, and they told the administration we want Don Lee. The administration said, okay, but we're not going to credit this course. And I told them I'm not coming. Why would I leave Chicago to come all the way, and I got a job, go all the way to Ithaca, New York, that cold-ass Ithaca, New York, to teach, students, be they black, and you're not going to credit the course. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not coming. Yeah. So the students basically got up. They said, no, we're going to make this happen. And so the chair of the English department called me almost crying, can we interview you? So they got 5 tenured professors, old-ass white men, going to interview me about black literature, which I'm going to teach, okay? So we sitting in one of these big rooms with all these pale, ignorant-ass white men, pictures around there. And these 5 old white men going to, this is the nerve of these people. They're going to question me about the literature I've been studying you know, from teenage to well, the age I was in, I was about 26, 27 years old. So I got, I'm like, so he started questioning me. And the questions about, basically about native son, black boy, and invisible man. That's it. All right. So they come around for the second round of questions, okay? I said, okay, I'm gonna stop this right now. So the guy would ask me a question about, well, just say black boy, right? You know. No, let's say invisible man. And I would ask him a question about Shadow and Act. You know, it's books of essays. The guy's embarrassed, he can't answer. This is a full professor.
Yeah.
You know, hadn't even read the book, okay? So I thought you were an Ellison scholar. Anyway, get to the next guy. This is before the chair asked his second question. He asked me a question about native son. I answered the question, and I asked him a question about Uncle Tom's Children. And most people don't know that Uncle Tom's Children is one of Richard Wright's books of essays. Okay? The guy come back, he says, no, young man, you mean Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is the nerve. I mean, number one. So I said, no, you know, I'm not talking about Harry Beecher's Stove. I'm talking about Richard Wright's Uncle Tom's Children. I pull the book out of my bag.
Ready to go.
And then he's embarrassed. He's turning 5 different colors, okay? And then you got the chair getting ready to ask me a question. And the chair said, you know, welcome to Cornell. Your course is important. This is why I'm saying reading is so critical. You know, if you want to wipe out ignorance, if you want to wipe out evil, read books.
Absolutely.
Read books. The problem in our community is we do not have the tradition after being enslaved by these criminals of this kind of study. All right? So anyway, I got the position. Now, I'm teaching at Cornell, and everything's opening up. I'm getting all this speaking all around the country and stuff like that. But what happened, which was very important, David Lorenz, like I said, went to John H. Johnson and said, we need to do a story on this brother. And he did. And the story hit in Ebony magazine in March of 1969. And my life changed. Ebony was selling, you know, at least 2 or 3 million copies. And they said about 5 people read each copy.
Yeah.
My phone just wouldn't stop ringing. And by that time, Gwendolyn Brooks basically had laid out my life. This is what I want you to do, okay? But my influence on her was instrumental. See, once she met us, she didn't have no straight hair no more. She had natural.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Once she began to deal with us, she left Harper and Row. See, Gwendolyn Brooks left Harper and Row. Her last book was in the Mecca. And if you're looking in the Mecca, that her last book at Harper and Row, there's a poem on Don L. Lee in the book. Her last book at Harper and Row. Because she left Harper and Row and went to Broadside Press. And her first book with Broadside Press was Riot. I mean, she's bad. So now, Random House comes after me. Paula Gettys, who wrote When and Where We Enter, and the book on, Diane, help me out, the book on,
Sororities,
I can't do it.
like women's sororities.
Yeah, that's on for sororities, but she wrote the book on Ida B. Wells. Okay.
Yeah, you're gonna love that bookstore.
And so what happened, Paula came to recruit me because she's working at Random House with Toni Morrison. And so I told Paula, I'm not leaving Broadside Press. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I've never been to New York. Can you bring me to New York? Under pretense that I'm thinking about going to Random House. So she did. Went to Random House. Walked into Toni Morrison's office. Now this is Toni Morrison before the bluest eye. Okay, she's an editor at Random House, one of the top editors at Random House. I walk into her office and Tony said, "Don, we're waiting on you." I say, you know, "Miss Morrison, I'm not coming. I cannot leave a black publishing company that's doing well off my work to come here.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen." And she understood. She understood. And so, it's too long, son. I mean, it's just too much. And see, being committed to black means see, this is the problem. You're too black. That's the problem. You're too black. And when Negroes and white people come after me with that too black stuff, I said, well, is it possible to be too white? Is it possible to be too white? Okay? And so that's what has basically, quote unquote, if you want to say, hurt your career, because if Donnell Lee is selling 140,000 copies, 4 books, and then all of a sudden you dropping off the map because you become Haki Madhubuti, that's it right there. You solved the problem. You see what I'm saying? I'm working on the book now. It's probably, well, I always say maybe my last book of poetry. But the book I'm working on now, poetry, is called "We Are Hated People." And that's it. The people that run the world, they don't care for us at all. Most certainly the Western world. All right? And even when you go to the non-Western world, they don't care for black people. And so, that's where we are. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You don't ever gotta say sorry to me. What you talking about? Nah, you're doing amazing. Honestly, the less talking I do, the better. So, all right. So going off of the third book press, this is just a question I thought of, as you were going. But poet or publisher? Which one do you like better?
I'm a poet.
You're a poet.
See, nothing that we have would have happened if I wasn't a poet, if I wasn't an artist. This is why art is so important. Because you find your voice in your art. Okay? This is why I have such respect for black musicians and black visual artists. They saved my life. All right? And if you don't know who you are, anybody can name you.
Absolutely.
And they will. Okay? And so, for me, this love of black people kept me out of a lot of fights with black people. Because I know that them coming after me is not what they really want to do. It's what they were taught to do.
Yeah.
Okay? In so many ways. And so, for me, the key question that was always in my mind, what do we own? We're living in this community, and the buildings we're living in are owned by people who don't even like us. You see, but their imperialism against us, not only against Africa, but against black people here, the enslavement of people of African ancestry here, it just moves on to the next level. So when you talk about segregation, you talk about Jim Crow. You can't talk about Jim Crow without talking about Jane Crow. And this is why I get a real attitude with brothers and dealing with these white women. All right? They don't know the history. You see what I'm saying? Somehow they are not part of, you see, the oppression. Their folks are not, the women are not part of the oppression of black people. Right? And so, for me, it was very clear, we don't even own ourselves. This self-hatred that exists among black people in this country is off the charts. You cannot kill another person that look like you unless you hate yourself.
Exactly.
That's it. You say, yeah, no care. Boom. But you bad. You see, you bad. And so your first and second generation, your grandfather, your father, your damn uncle, they're all locked up. And so we get educated in prison, and you don't have no problem going to prison because you're safe. You got your boys in there. You locked down, got all these babies out here in the black community, all right? But now you among your boys. That is why it is so important that we build independent black institutions.
Yeah.
not Negro institutions. You got an Irish community in Chicago. You got an Italian community in Chicago. You got a Polish community in Chicago. You got a Hispanic community in Chicago. And they own the stuff. You got a black community, and we rent and lease them and shit. So we started buying property. We bought a farm in upstate in Michigan. We bought a farm in New Haven, Michigan. You know, because I was getting ready to get our babies out of Chicago from our schools. You know, when the deal really came down. Yeah. And so we bought property and had we had a bookstore, African American bookstore. We had a credit union. We had a typesetting company.
Taking it back.
We had our schools. We started our schools. We bought 2 big bars buildings. So we had an architect come in there and reconfigure the buildings for our schools from pre-K to 3rd grade. Okay, and then we had, because there was 2 different ways you can go into the storefront. So we had one part for the school, the other part for the other businesses.
Gotcha.
In third world price. And then when I found out that this very large, influential Catholic church was closing up on the south side, in fact, less than 10, 12 blocks from where we were now located, I called some of my Catholic friends and said, well, who makes it, is it open? They said, no, it's been closed for almost 2 years. Nobody's in there except some people. So I went down to the archdiocese and to the real estate people. I said, can we buy that property? He said, and the white man, mispronouncing my name and acting all ignorant. And I just held back and said, we want to try to buy this property. Because see, we had 2 storefronts across from that whole block that Catholic school, was on. And this was like 69, this was 70, 71, 72. And so we would run past that school to a park where we were exercising, because we stayed in shape. Getting ready. I mean, see, revolution was never rhetoric to me. It was, and I guess my military training had a lot to do with that. Because I knew these boys are serious, all right? And so when I found out that property was empty, not being used, the guy lied to me and said some other Catholics. So I got out, came back home and called some people and said, well, who actually makes these decisions on the south side of Chicago? Yeah. It was Bishop Winton Gregory. I don't know if any of y'all know that name, Winton Gregory. Keep that in your mind for a minute. I started calling him and he would never call back. So I left my name Don Lee rather than Haki Madhubuti. He called, his secretary called back and said, are you the poet? I said, yes, I am. I need to talk to Bishop Gregory. It's an emergency. He said, she got 15 minutes on 2 weeks from now. I said, can I get those 15 minutes? So, I tied up and everything. Told my wife, I'm gonna get this. So I went out there, of course 2 minutes turned into a couple hours. Yeah. And when I left, I had a letter from Bishop Winton Gregory to Cardinal Bernardine stating that we now should only be on the list to buy the property, we should be at the top of the list. So I went back to the real estate office, and the white man said, I don't know what you did, but you're on the list, but if you're serious about this, I need $50,000. My wife and I, we just bought our first home, and we took out a second mortgage. So we got $40,000, and from the board we got another 10, and we took $50,000. But see, then what they want to do is overcharge. They want to charge us $1 million. They want to charge us $1 million for this property. So we're not paying them $1 million. I said, that's not going to happen. And so what happened, we got our people to do an appraisal of the building. And they said the best they can charge us for around something, it's a half a block. Okay. It's a school, convent, rectory, church, everything. And so it came in around $700,000, something like that. And anyway, we worked it out. And the way we worked it out, this is how black people do stuff. I'm broke. Now they took $50,000. We don't have no money. Trying to keep our damn home. Right? But I found a minister, Negro minister, who wanted to buy the church. So I said, okay, we'll sell your church for $300,000. Okay. And he was able to come up with $100,000 right away. We got the property. we got the property. We own it, it's ours. So again, we moved to the level where I was able to sell the property over on, we had the first property, I was able to sell that, because when we went into the school, it was messed up. We had to put close to $75,000 in to bring the property up. And then went into the rectory, that's the picture that's on the catalog, that's our headquarters. We had to put close to 100, the damn priest in there raising pigeons. I mean, look, I got all these stories, man. And so I'm running around speaking every place, and all the money's going in to keep this thing going, keep this thing going. And the people that's working with us are working for almost nothing, and then they donating all this time and space. You see what I'm saying? So it's a glorious story, but it's a difficult story, and it's still going on. You know,
I mean,
we just had to borrow $1 million because the state demanded that we put an elevator in the school. And the elevator cost $75,000. All right? So we said, okay, let's go ahead and renovate everything. This was about 2 years ago. And so we put the elevator in the school. We put solar panels on the roof, new roof, and new solar panels on the roof. Redid the parking lot. Anyway, these are, now, so, okay, I went to mention Winton Gregory.
yeah.
Bishop Winton Gregory now is cardinal. He's the first black cardinal in the United States. So, you know, these connections work. And so you drop these names, and I got some kind of a history with them, but I never tried to abuse that history. Even with Gwendolyn Brooks, you know, she's really my cultural mother. I mean, early on she started calling me son. And so I left Cornell, came back and taught at University of Illinois, Chicago. Then I got a call from, you never guess who I got a call from, Howard University. So Howard, the provost of Howard University called me and said, Don, we want you to come and teach.
They wasn't coming to arrest you or anything like that? Or?
What?
They wasn't coming to arrest you or anything like that for impersonating the Howard student?
No. Andrew Billingsley, Dr. Andrew Billingsley. One of the great scholars in our community, he was a provost. Claiming Jacob's Ladder is one of his books. And Dr. Billingsley said, can you come in and talk to me? So they, send me a ticket. So I came in and talked to Billingsley and Dr. Billingsley, and he said, we want you here. See, not only do I want you here, but the great Stephen Henderson wants you here. I said, oh, wow. See, people don't know Stephen Henderson. Stephen Henderson is one of our great cultural scientists. He's deceased now. And he started the Institute for the Black World when he was at Morehouse. He was teaching at Morehouse. And this book that really changed the whole way we look at black poetry was the Understanding the New Black Poetry by Stephen E. Henderson. But he was a director. And he chose me out of all the poets because he was reading my poetry early in his first book, The Militant Black Writer. He mentions me in this book.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so when he talked to me and said, we need you here, I said, I want to come. But I'm talking to Dr. Billingsley, I said, well, he said, what do we need to get you here? Well, we're going to give you full professorship. We're going to pay you full professor salary. I said, well, that's fine, but what I want is, I want to commute. He said, what? I said, I can't leave Chicago again. We're building these institutional structures. And by that time I was reading Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. And so what he writes about in Future Shock about how white professors, are teaching in more than one university and living in cities, more than one city. So I said, I cannot leave Chicago, but can I commute every week, teach here and do my work in Chicago? So I would come in on Tuesdays and leave out on Thursday or Friday. He said, That's not gonna happen. You know, Sterling Brown is here, right? You know, Chancellor Williams is here. On the east side, they live out in the city, and you talking about community. And I'm not thinking more than myself, because I'm just saying at this point, I cannot leave Chicago again. I walked out. Before I got out the building, his secretary came after me. Professor Lee. And Andrew said, Dr. Billitsy said, you drive a hard bargain, young man, we found some money. So the university is gonna pick up your travel between Chicago and DC every week, but you gotta have an apartment here. Okay? I said, yes, sir, that's not a problem. And that's how that happened. But 3 years turned into 8 years. 8 years. But see, I'm not in the white world. So white journals not writing about Don L.A. who became Haki Madhubuti. I'm not getting no prizes from white people. You know, nobody's recognizing my poetry and all that stuff. So I'm working almost exclusively on the black side. Anyway, you know, so this is the key point. I learned early that you got to be about your life and your people, you got to be a decision maker. Because if you're a decision maker, that means essentially other people are making choices within the parameters of your decisions. And that's what me, my wife, and others I work with. And let me just say a quick thing about my wife. I met my wife in struggle. She had finished her master's degree at University of Chicago, 20 years old. And they had asked me to come to this high school, grade school, where they was teaching a summer program to read poetry to these young people. And, you know, I go up there and read poetry, and nothing but these fine black women. All of them fine. Okay? So I'm like, we get up the name and address and everything. And so, and she said, you know, they got my name. We talked to each other. I said, I called you, right? You know, anyway, a little bit of levity there. And so we ended up marrying probably around 74. But we, you know, building these institutions together.
Yeah.
But my wife, once we married and started having our children, we talked, and her mother lives with us now, okay? And we talked about her going back to get a PhD. And she did. She went back to the University of Chicago, got a free ride. You know what I'm talking about? You don't need to pay for a PhD. She went back and got a free ride from the University of Chicago. She did a PhD in 3 years. Soon as she came out, Northwestern was like camping out.
Yeah.
Waiting for her to come teach at Northwestern.
Yeah.
But she did. And my wife retired from Northwestern. But before she retired, she got all these honors and accolades. My wife was in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. My wife is in the American Academy of Education. My wife has a endowed chair, which she still has the title for, from Northwestern University. When she retired from Northwestern University, the president came to her retirement, which was an all-day celebration on her work. And they had scholars from all over the world come to comment on her work. They use her work in China, okay? And so the president said, you know, Dr. Lee, Carol D. Lee, you can look up Carol D. Lee. He said, Dr. Lee, we know you are ready to leave. She's been about 20-some odd years. He said, what we want to do to show our appreciation for you, we're giving you a full year sabbatical. So she's retiring, but she's getting a full year sabbatical with pay. whole year. Okay. And it's not like the regular sabbatical. When you have the regular sabbatical, you got to create something.
Yeah.
No, you do what you want to do.
She was chilling. Oh my gosh.
Hey, man.
Wow, that is amazing.
And she is now the current president of the National Academy of Education.
Dang.
I can go on and on. But you know what? I'm not no shortstop. You see what I'm saying? That, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's all back and forth, you know.
I like how that you had this one.
So she bad, I'm telling you. Dr. Carol D. Lee, Mama Sufficient.
I'm gonna definitely look her up after this.
Yeah.
100%. Thank you for telling me about that. Okay, so we covered poetry, Third World Press, the origins. So to close out for Third World Press, because I got some other questions for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Future ideals or future goals that you may have for Third World Press. They can be short term or long term, or anything that you feel you want that organization to represent in the future.
Well, this is our 55th year.
Yeah.
In September is the 50th, the year we were founded. And Dr. Turner is on our board. Okay, she brought us here to do something do a major event at the Bloxham Institute tomorrow. And the 55 years have been tremendous in the sense that we've been able to do quite a bit. And one of my close friends is a brother who passed a few years ago by the name of Walter P. Lomax Jr., MD. And what we're going to announce tomorrow at the Bloxham Institute at Temple University is the two awards that we're given every year from Third World Press. The Gwendolyn Brooks Social Justice Award in Poetry, and the Walter P. Lomax Jr., MD, Social Justice Award in Nonfiction. Okay? Dr. Turner is going to be the judge. He's going to pull together a committee to read the manuscripts for that. And Dr. Keith Gilliard, who's also on our board, is going to pull together a committee to judge the poetry. So, I know y'all heard of Dr. Lomax if you don't know his work, but he has basically been, he passed in 2013, but physician, community activist, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and I met him 20-some years, 25 years ago, and he was helping black businesses across the country. And I knew he was having this meeting, and I called him asking, can I come? And he said, well, yes, but not to this meeting. You're a little bit more advanced with these people I'm dealing with now, but I will come in later. So I'm persistent and called back maybe 2 weeks later and, come on in. He picked me up from the airport, took me to his home with Beverly Lomax, his wife. And that started a deep relationship. Because he's a reader.
Yeah.
He's a reader. And we're reading. And I think that he knew about my work through Beverly Lomax. Because she's still on it, but Beverly still has a natural. And that started. So he's helped Third World Press, the family, in terms of Lomax Foundation. It's helped Third World Press stay alive. And I'm just trying to do something to keep his name and memory out there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we're trying to get a book done on him now, so we're working on that project.
All right, let me know how that goes.
Yeah. And so you see the new books that we are publishing along with the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
So those are 8 new books. Okay. And say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are out. 3 are coming. Yeah. But these are projects of love.
Yeah.
You love people, love black people. And again, I get back to, we cannot move without knowledge. You see? And there are actually books on ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a major book out of Rutgers University on ignorance, not ignorance, but the study of ignorance, not knowing what ignorance is, something like that. It's complicated times. And it's $100. It's a major piece of work. And so what we're trying to do, and we'll continue to do as we move into our 56th year, is to publish major works in poetry, fiction, literary nonfiction, children's books, and so on. And that's the future. So I'm trying to move. I got a series board now. As I mentioned, Dr. Turner's on the board, and we're just trying to. And Third World Press is a 501c3. So I turned into 501c3 about 15 years ago because I saw that. See, my sons are engineers. They're not into reading a whole lot of books. They're talking about numbers and building stuff. And my daughters are readers, but I never wanted to force my children into stuff. And so I said, okay, make it a charity, 501c3, therefore belongs to the people. Okay, got this board. We're very serious about trying to bring funds and money in, and that's where we are now. So transition, I'm trying to find a person to take my place. I thought I had a person, but that didn't work out. But I'm trying to find a person to take my place. Because I'm working on 3 books. Actually 4, well 3. I'm working on the book of poetry, I mentioned that earlier. I'm working on a book on the autobiography of a black vegan. Okay. And then I'm trying to do my second part of my memoir. Now, Dr. Turner has done these series of interviews with me, which will be the next book out in terms of my life. And I've been knowing Dr. Turner for I guess about 20, 25 years, something like that. And we published 2 or 3 of your books. 2, 3? 3 of your books. So, Dr. Turner is like a sister to me in the sense that she really looks after me. Sometimes I say, well, back off, let me. Look at you, found this tea for me and stuff. She made this happen, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's a sister. That's just like your biological sister, but my biological sister died this year.
Sorry about that.
She was 79. But, life never did work out. 6 children and, like I said, 5 different fathers. None of the fathers helped to raise the children. And there were just so many problems there. This is why, essentially, family is so critical and so important. And that we men, we got to stay with the sisters that we marry. You just can't keep walking and marrying here and walking out and all this other junk. But it's what we do, what we've been taught to do. We think, I was just talking to, I don't know who I was talking to somebody, but about black men wearing dresses and black women getting blonde hair now. This is where we are. Mm. Why the sisters get blonde hair? Why the men wearing dresses? Mm. So I got to accept that. That's not my tradition. I don't have to accept it. I'm not going to criticize you. All right, that's your thing. Okay, my daughter married a woman. All right, and I love the woman that she married. I don't have a problem with that. Okay, I did have a problem with my no, I'm going to say that. I didn't have a problem with that.
Cut the interview short talking about something.
Boy, she would beat me up. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Thank you for that as well.
Yeah.
For adding all that. All right, so again, that covers Third World Press for us. So if I would like to, get into another aspect of your life and how you live, just ask you some questions.
Sure.
Civil rights organizations. I know that you do a fair share amount of activism. I mean, just talking to you for 5 minutes, I'm pretty sure anybody can get that. So, could you tell me about your involvements in the organizations that you know, associated with?
This is some time ago. I was an active member of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. I was kind of tangential to SNCC. When I was teaching at Howard University, a lot of the brothers and sisters in SNCC, they started a bookstore called Drum and Spirit. So I kind of helped them with that. And when they published their first book, I wrote the introduction to it. And I was very close to many of the people in SNCC. Charlie Cobb, Judy Richardson, and others. Actually, SALC in Chicago. When King came to Chicago, he lived on the west side. I was in all of his demonstrations, all the marches, every one that King led, I was in that. When they did the movie of King, I'm a foot soldier. I'm just, you know, I'm not Don Lee at that. I'm just a foot soldier in the movement. And but I was at the church where he was giving a major talk, and the camera pinned in on me, just for a few seconds as it went on. Jesse and I used to be friends, you know, but Jesse just became Jesse, you know, and we just were gone. I helped the Nation of Islam get back up. Farrakhan, a sister by the name of Abba John Brown, who founded one of the major black theaters in Chicago, and I were the Midwest co-leaders of the Festac, which was a major African festival that took place in Nigeria, led by Jeff Donaldson and a man I did not mention, which I should have mentioned, Howard W. Fuller. I'm here because of Howard W. Fuller, number two. So the men in my life was not only Malcolm, but Brother Randall and Howard W. Fuller. Okay, Charlie Brewers I mentioned. Howard W. Fuller was the managing editor of Negro Digest Black World magazine that Johnson Publishing Company published. Yeah. He was the first real serious black intellectual that I met back in the 60s who had traveled literally around all over Africa and most parts of Europe. He did his undergraduate degree, I believe, at Wayne State University. But just like when I met Willard Brooks, when I met Howard Fuller, there was this kind of closeness that you just don't get with people. Yeah. And Howard said he saw something in me he just didn't see in other people. Right? But Howard was one of the founders, co-founders of OBASI, Organization of Black American Culture, out of Chicago. And he was actually the founder of, along with us, of OBASI's Writers Workshop. And out of OBASI had all these different workshops, but we were the only ones who began to try to concretize our existence. We rented a storefront, and that we paid for out of collecting dues from ourselves. And Hort was the leader. And he edited the major magazine to come out of the Black Arts Movement. See, Negro Digest became Black World Magazine because that's what we wanted. Mm-hmm. We set up a picket line outside of Johnson Publishing Company when they had the old building, and I was a spokesperson. So Mr. Johnson said, come in and talk about it. And I said, you know, I'm speaking for the group. Hort is not a part of this because he works for Johnson Publishing Company, so I'm leading the group. I said, Mr. Johnson, there are three things we want. One, we want Negro Digest to become Black World Magazine. No problem. Two, we want you to take all those skin whiteness out of Ebony Magazine. No problem. Three, we want you to start putting articles in Ebony Magazine that were very positive about Africa. He said, yeah, Mr. Lee, yeah, we can do all that. And then the fourth thing was the fourth thing. we want you to economically support the black artistic institutions
Absolutely.
in Chicago. He said, okay. And he did all four. In fact, one of the articles on black